All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us here today. We are happy to host this workshop on FirstNet and AT&T, 21st Century Real-Time Data and Communications. I am Shannon Meisner. I am the Director of Governmental Affairs for the International Association of Firefighters, and I'm pleased to host all of you here today for this exciting workshop where we're going to talk about FirstNet, about communications challenges facing the fire service, and about the path forward. And I will just start here today by giving a little bit of background about what we're going to be talking about. And I recognize many of you here in the room who are communications experts, and so welcome to this class. As many of you know, in 2012, Congress passed legislation establishing FirstNet, which is the first of its kind national broadband communications network dedicated solely to the needs of first responders. 1 decade earlier, in the wake of September 11th attacks, first responders and policymakers recognized that there was a fundamental gap in emergency responder communications and how they worked during a large-scale disaster. And namely, our systems couldn't easily operate across and between agencies, and communications and operations were difficult, if not impossible. So the goal of FirstNet is to provide firefighters, emergency medical personnel, and other responders with communications capabilities, specifically the ability to work across and between networks and overcome these shortcomings. And today, FirstNet operates in all 50 states and provides professional firefighters with communications and collaboration options to complement LMR voice communications systems. Just 2 weeks ago, FirstNet released a new roadmap outlining the future of the network and detailing new coverage and capability goals that FirstNet intends to pursue in the coming years. And here, with today's workshop, I have a fantastic panel today that I'd like to introduce. First off is Mike Worrell. He's the Area Director West and Senior Fire Services Advisor for the FirstNet Authority. Mike joined FirstNet in 2015 as the Senior Fire Services Advisor, providing outreach and education to fire departments across the nation. Mike previously served in the Phoenix Fire Department for 29 years, starting as a computer technician for the CAD system and promoted through the ranks, becoming a firefighter, a paramedic, a captain, and eventually retired as Division Chief of Technical Services. In addition, he served as part of the FEMA Urban Search and Rescue Response System as Task Force and Incident Support Team member. He's also a qualified communications leader and communications technician instructor. And lastly, Mike has worked with the IAFF on communications issues for many years to increase firefighter safety. Second on our panel is Brian Mahalik. He's the AT&T Regional Manager for the FirstNet program in Texas. Brian has been involved in public safety communications for over a decade and was previously employed by Motorola Solutions and Kodiak Networks. Brian has held various positions in land mobile field engineering, product management, and business development. He joined AT&T in 2017 as a senior member of the FirstNet program with a focus on outreach and consultation within Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona, right? Arizona. Right. And last on our panel today is Billy Freeman. He is the First Responder Network Authority Senior Public Safety Advisor representing Kentucky, Mississippi, and Tennessee, and the FRNA Fire Services Community, First Responder Network Authority Fire Services Community. Billy retired after 28 years of service in nearby Memphis, Tennessee Fire Department, retiring as a company officer. He co-led the implementation of the first-time installation of mobile data terminals in 200 fire and EMS apparatus. And Billy also served 25 years as part of the FEMA Urban Search and Rescue Response System as Task Force and Incident Support Team Communications Unit Leader and Communications Technician. He's also a qualified Communications Unit Leader and Communications Technician instructor and helped develop the original course curriculum. So again, today we are going to be talking a little bit about FirstNet. We are going to be discussing its impacts on emergency communications in the public safety community. We'll discuss the network's benefits and limitations, as well as the state of emergency communications generally, including new laws which rob public safety of spectrum known as the T-band, and endangering public safety communications in some of the largest municipalities in the country. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike to begin our presentation. Mike?
Thank you, Shannon. I'm a wanderer, so I'm going to stand up here. So first off, I'm like Shannon said, I'm the area director for the West for the FirstNet Authority. This was an opportunity so great that I quit the Phoenix Fire Department. I left the fire department to do this. So we're going to talk a little about FirstNet history. Shannon covered a lot of it, but we're going to talk a little bit more detail on what that history is, and we're also going to talk about the structure of FirstNet and the distinction between the FirstNet Authority and FirstNet AT&T. So we go back to 2001. Shannon mentioned some of the difficulties we faced when we had those two events happen in the U.S. We had responders come from all over the nation. They converged on these two different incidents. And many of those responders faced interoperability problems, operability problems that were all related to communications. And this isn't even to mention all the line of duty death reports that mention communications as a significant factor in loss of firefighter lives. In 2004, this report came out from Congress, which was called the 9/11 Commission Report. And in that report, it recommended that national spectrum, that nationwide spectrum, so that we could build a dedicated public safety network. But this also validated, what we thought had happened to us in 2001. So it really validated, yes, there were interoperable communication problems. We didn't have a nationwide network. We had challenges, that we could not overcome, and it resulted in, inefficient operations on those scenes. Public safety leaders also came together at this time to unite and go before the legislative bodies of the U.S. and talk about, the need for this public safety network. So then we fast forward to 2012. We look at 2012, that's the year the Middle Class Tax Relief Act was passed. That's the year that the FirstNet Authority was established. And when I say FirstNet Authority, we are a government agency, an independent authority that operates under the Department of Commerce. So that's the first distinction. Secondly, is we are allocated $7 billion in funds. And out of that, we took, about $500,000 out for operating funds for the FirstNet Authority, and the rest of the funds were going to be dedicated to procurement of this network that we envisioned. Public safety isn't real good at, building things, so they recognized that there was a need for a board, and the reason they selected this type of a structure, it had to be more corporately structured so that we can maintain the fast pace of technology companies like AT&T, if they were awarded a contract. So the board is made up of 15 members. There are 5 members that are public safety representatives. There are 5 members that represent federal partners, and then the remaining 5 members are members of the telecommunications industry and finance. The next thing was required by law is the Public Safety Advisory Committee. And it was recognized that public safety needed to have a voice in the way this network was deployed so the network would meet the requirements for public safety. So that Public Safety Advisory Committee, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. The next thing was dedicated spectrum. It allocated 20 megahertz of what we call band class 14 spectrum. Brian's going to talk about band class 14, but this was key to what we were doing and the goals that we had. In 2012 to 2016, the FirstNet Authority went out and we were meeting with all the states, territories, and the District of Columbia to identify what the specific needs were in each state for public safety communications. And as part of that, we validated the numbers of users. We took CAD information and validated where those calls were occurring. And we also went over the state where they desired coverage. Then we moved to 2016, 2017. We released an RFP. That award was made to AT&T. AT&T has the contract to deploy, operate, and maintain the network for the next 25 years, or 20 plus years. We delivered 56 state and territory plans. So each state received a state plan that was tailored to the requirements that were from the information that we had gathered in that 2012 to 2016 period. each of those states received a tailored plan that met that state's requirements. And with pretty amazingly, all 56 governors opted in. So that was really a huge success and win for us. I'm going to leave the 2018 and beyond. Billy's going to talk a little bit about that in a minute, so we'll move on to the next slide. So this Public Safety Advisory Committee, this was required by law. So public safety had a voice in the way this network was deployed, operated, and some of the capabilities it had. They're tasked with doing specific things like, what are coverage requirements? What is hardening for sites and resiliency mean? So we really rely on them for input on how this network's going to shape up. The fire service has several representatives on this advisory committee. There's the Metro Chiefs, the IEFF, National Volunteer Fire Council, and the International Association of Fire Chiefs. So like I said, when you look back and you see, we had about $7 billion and $6.5 billion was actually allocated to building a network. We required some type of innovative, process or something to make this network a reality. Because when you look at, networks out there, the value of those networks are typically, around $200 billion, and $6.5 billion wasn't going to build a network. So it was recognized that we were going to have to do some type of public-private partnership. So like I said, AT&T was awarded that contract to build, operate, and maintain this network. We required them to build a nationwide core to handle just public safety traffic. We required them to do a radio access network build-out on that band class 14. So what this really means is this is a physically separate network from their commercial network. And then they also had to have all the logistical support they needed to operate, maintain, and keep this network running. And Brian's going to talk about that, so I won't cover that. But what the FirstNet Authority does, we have this contract. We're responsible for contract oversight and monitoring to make sure that those deliverables the deliverables of the contract are met. We have public safety advocacy, which we actually advocate for you as public safety and the public safety community on making sure this network is actually what you need. And then we have an innovation strategy investment plan for the future. So when I start talking about contract metrics, when you look back, we have this, it's a 5-year build plan. It actually started in 2017. The build will be completed in 2022. So really, this is really fast moving. If you really think about it and look at March 30th of 2018, that's when the actual build out of the radio access network was started. So really, we're only about a year and a half into the build, and AT&T's already 60% done, which is pretty phenomenal. The other thing that happened is when this contract was awarded, AT&T allowed access to their commercial side as well as the band class 14 they were going to build out. And what this meant was that the network was immediately available. So now, today, we already have users on that network. As we move into the future, starting on March 30th of this year, these are some of the contract deliverables for this year. And these, we're monitoring these things and making sure that they are delivered on time. And so one of the things that happens is as these things are delivered is AT&T gets incremental payments of that $6.5 billion up until the final payment that will happen in 2022. So I mentioned public safety advocacy, and this is where Billy and I work at, public safety advocacy within the FirstNet Authority. And our job is to educate and inform the user community on what FirstNet brings, what are some of the benefits of it, what the deployment status is, and we go all over the country doing this. Secondly is to collaborate, to engage and promote the successful implementation. So that's meeting with agencies, working with them to identify, what their broadband communications needs are, what their technology roadmap looks like, what their technology plans are for the future, and identifying where, FirstNet might fit in there, and some of the benefits they may gain from that. The outcome of all this is it becomes a catalyst for, increasing users and increasing adoption of this network, increasing interoperability for the country. So public safety influence. We also have product influence because now we have a large number of users. We have a great corporate partner, AT&T, that allows us to leverage their influence on making things available for firefighters. These are some of the early benefits that we've heard from departments out there that are actually adopting FirstNet. So some of the things are like asset tracking, location services. We had a department in Arizona. How many of you are golfers out there? Golf isn't a big deal to me. But anyway, we had this big golf tournament called the Waste Management Open in Scottsdale, Arizona. And on the day of that event, it's the second largest single day event in the US behind the Indy 500. On the day of that event, there are more firefighters operating within that venue that are than protecting the actual city of Scottsdale. One of the challenges they had was being able to track assets within that venue. So this year they were tracking medic carts, medic units, their medic bags, those kinds of things to locate those and know where those people were so they're better able to dispatch them on incidents within that venue. Secondly, push to talk. In addition to their LMR system, they want to overload their LMR system, but as an alternative means of communications, they established push to talk over the LTE devices, and that allowed them to communicate things over those LTE devices. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. The next big one is priority and preemption. When you look at priority and preemption, you put a lot of people in a small confined space, the ability to access a network. If you can't access that network, it's no good to you. So they had FirstNet, and this was the first time that they had used it. This was also the first time they were able to move data in and out of that venue. They had other devices there that were with other carriers, and they weren't able to complete calls. They weren't able to do anything. So what they did with those other devices, they set them up for Wi-Fi calling. They connected to a FirstNet device so they could complete their calls, which was pretty amazing. The other thing is secure data sharing, making sure the data maintains its integrity from start to finish. And there are encryption things and all that stuff that goes on behind the scenes that makes that happen. Customer care and engagement. AT&T has stood up just a FirstNet dedicated customer care and engagement that's based in the US, and Brian will talk about that. What does this mean for the agency? Well, in general, increased efficiencies and time on patrol. So for instance, being able to track where units are, you're better able to dispatch them and get them on scene faster. For police officers, they're able to maintain their time on patrol longer. They're able to do things in a mobile environment where they had to go into a precinct office before. Advanced planning, being able to have access to, say, deployables that Brian's going to talk about so that you can plan in advance, where you need that coverage and capacity. And this enables critical real-time information sharing. And it's also created this platform for innovation. Because of this capability and a dedicated network for all public safety, we now have these interoperability opportunities as well as advanced capabilities that are coming, such as Internet of Things and sensors and that kind of thing. So I told you a little bit about a success story in Scottsdale, and I'll tell you another story, and this is another Arizona story, is that the Arizona Department of Public Safety, they have a radio network that's a statewide radio network. Unfortunately, they don't have great statewide coverage. They have holes in their network. And state patrol officers, they cover large swaths of the highways. And these officers know where those holes are. So unfortunately, their radio doesn't work everywhere. Well, the Arizona Department of Public Safety decided to do a pilot, and they tied their LTE, push-to-talk over LTE, to their regular LMR radio system. So now they're able to leverage the coverage footprint of AT&T with their state coverage footprint, and a lot of the areas that had holes, the LTE covered. And there were instances where an officer went out on a call and got into trouble and had to call for help, needed backup. And remember, these guys cover these large areas, and their backup may be 20, 30 minutes away. So time is really critical to them. He tries to call on his radio, it doesn't work. He picks up the LTE device, calls for help on the LTE device. They hear him and they send his backup. Well, the 90-day pilot ends, and Arizona DPS, the project manager, goes, okay, pilot's over, we're going to take your device from you. And what do you think happened? It didn't happen. They still have those devices today. And now they're expanding that program. Another one was, talking to someone in Hawaii. They have a Bruno Mars concert. I guess Bruno Mars is a big deal in Hawaii. Like I said, in the past, there's a lot of congestion in the stadiums. They weren't able to use their devices. This year they could. And so one of the things, we always hear is that, coverage isn't quite the same as those other companies. But this officer said, you know what? If any network can have great coverage, but if I can't access that network and use it, it does no good to me. So that was like kind of a light bulb for everybody going off. So with that, I'm going to close out, and I'm going to hand it over to Brian, and Brian's going to talk a little bit about the network and some of the things that they're doing.
Okay. All right, thank you, Mike. Like they said, my name is Brian Mahalik. I'm Regional Director supporting the FirstNet program in Texas. I am an AT&T employee. I've got peers that work with our FirstNet Authority counterparts. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the here and now. Is anybody here using FirstNet? All right, excellent. You guys can come up here and do this presentation. But this is really exciting. We're now no longer in the concept phase, we're in the rollout phase. So we're about 2.5 years into this long-term partnership, building your network and bringing this technology out to the field. And AT&T being the construction partner for this network is extremely important, not only because we're a big company and this is a major effort for us, but we're also the only national network that's union-based. We use union employees, and having union labor is very, very important to us. As we're constructing this network, and like Mike mentioned, knocking down these requirements for how we construct it, we built a physically separate nationwide core. And the reason that that's important is we can monitor your traffic, we can switch your traffic, we can respond to your incidences in a different way when we have all of your assets and your information sitting in a physically separate core. We secure that network differently, and also we care for that network differently. So inside AT&T, we're an entire business unit, we're an entire organization. That lets us care for you in a different way than me just being a member of another team that's out there. We can respond to your, and I'll get into some of those use cases that Mike mentioned as well. But also, as we continue to grow this partnership and build this network, education is very important. The software tools that we're bringing out as a part of FirstNet have built-in training, but also me and my peers will come out and do sessions like this. We'll meet with you locally. We're more than happy to come out on site and continue to answer questions. But who's using this network, right? So we've been through this about 2.5 years. Like Mike mentioned, we've done the opt-in phase. We're in the construction portion of this, and now you and your peers are starting to see some of the benefits of this network being out there. So as a couple days ago, we now have 9,000 agencies using this network. That's over 750,000 connections. And when we talk about connections, that means the smartphone, the tablet, the MDT, the devices that you're using every day. And that allows us to not only continue to care for you, but also to work with the authority on what comes next. How do we reinvest into this network? And Billy's going to talk about our roadmap. But the exciting part is what this means to you is we're ahead of schedule. So when we talk about building out the Band 14, the spectrum that Congress set aside for you, we are ahead of plan. And actually in this room, you're able to access Band 14. But it's not just about the Band 14, but about all the other things that we're adding as a part of the FirstNet program. So we're adding applications, certainly we're adding coverage, and then how you access this network through the devices. We're working with all the vendors and bringing the scale of AT&T to keep the cost of the devices down, make sure that this network is affordable, because we understand that it could be the best, most incredible technology in the world, but cost does play a real-world factor, and that's something that's very intentional. As we continue to add not just the Band 14, but we added priority and preemption. So anywhere that you go with an AT&T coverage footprint has priority and preemption as a FirstNet customer. What that means is you're going to be able to access that network, you're going to be able to complete your calls and provide your service. And then we're continuing to grow this coverage. So the intent through this contract as we build out is not just to put Band 14 and build this network in populous areas and high density areas, but it's really to cover the continental US as well as our 6 territories in a way that provides you the service. And in the places that we don't necessarily stand up additional coverage, I'll cover that here in a few slides. How do we react to that? We don't want your service to be either there and it's great, or it's not there and there's not a plan B. We have deployable assets, we have resources, we have other capability that we can bring to support you that are included as a part of being a FirstNet customer. And so when you look at how you access it, what it means to you, the types of capability that's out there, it all starts with that SIM card. So when you're accessing FirstNet, you see the alpha tag. This isn't a commercial network. It's a public safety network. So the FirstNet alpha tag, that FirstNet SIM, is only accessible with that network identifier. First priority, that's our priority and preemption service, using a device that has band 14 in there. The care that is going in with the various OEMs to make sure that not only is the device carrying a band 14 chipset, but is it FirstNet ready? Is it meeting the standards that the FirstNet Authority has put out there for the devices that work on this network? We do see push-to-talk. I'll cover that here shortly. But also, once you do acquire the network and you begin using it, how do we care for you after the fact? This is going to be a long-term partnership. This is a very, very deliberate effort for our company and with the FirstNet Authority on how we take care of the first responder community and the fire service forever. We have a separate care organization that has their own number, has their own response time, has their own organization that's there for you. And Mike kind of touched on the Internet of Things and local control as you begin to round out your strategies and put sensors and additional capability beyond just a communication tool. How does that connect to FirstNet? That's something else that we're bringing out. And local control, this isn't the capability that's behind lock and key. We are bringing that capability out to the field. That way it's in your hands. You have the ability to connect people to the network, verify users, and also provide uplift in that time of need. The Security Operations Center and then deployables. I'll cover that in a minute. But one of the really exciting capabilities is expanding beyond just your LMR network. And the reason that that's exciting is you use an LMR network today, it provides great service in the location that you're in. But what happens when you leave the area that it serves and you need to go beyond your footprint, or you need to reach out to just one person, or when you need to track assets and things like that? Those are the capabilities that we're looking at to bring beyond just LAN mobile. We can absolutely work with your radio networks to provide group calling, but now you can do one-to-one, you can do broadband group calling as well, and you can go off network, you can go to a Wi-Fi network, places that you don't necessarily have an LTE signal. And the deployables. So the deployables are a very important capability of the FirstNet program because first of all, they're a no-charge service. So they come as a FirstNet customer, you're able to request a deployable asset, and we have a response time commitment to deliver that asset out to you wherever you are. In my state of Texas right now, there is a fire that we are supporting with a deployable asset. But the other piece that's really exciting with this capability is the entire triage process that kicks off, because you guys know, not every tool or not every situation requires the same tool. So when you request the deployable asset, now we're able to put other exercises in motion inside of FirstNet to solve for your challenges, whether that's a generator, you need portable power, maybe you do need LTE signal, maybe you need both. Those are the kinds of things that allow us to solve for your needs, and that's where this partnership goes, is it goes beyond just, I have a problem, I'm not sure how to solve it. You bring that to our team, and now we're able to respond to you in a different way than we had in the past. You see here we've got 72 in there today. We continue to grow that, so there's about 75 now. And that's in addition to what we had as just core AT&T assets. And so they're physical trucks. They come with staff that are ready to roll it up and support you. They come with technicians. And the intent is to solve a real problem for you. And so by having these, and the use case around a deployable is not necessarily just that emergency event, but also training. If you don't know what kind of capability you're requesting, that's something that we want to educate on. So as you have these training events and you have exercises and you're practicing, we participate in that as well. And that's another support response that we provide. Oh, yes, sir. Yeah. Yeah, so we call them SAT Colts, satellite-powered cell-on-light truck. So it is a full truck. They're fully self-supported. So they have on-site power generation, they have a satellite uplink, and they have about a 50-foot mast that provides 3 sectors of LTE. So they're completely standalone. They don't require anything for you to provide other than a place that we can park it and security, ideally. If there's a fuel cycle that we can participate in, that's something that our teams coordinate, on demand. But they are completely self-supported. So really, the request for you guys and your teams would say, "Hey, I have a problem, and we'll help you solve it."
Have there been any opportunities for long-term deployment, a week or two? Has that already happened?
Yeah, that's a good question. So that has happened. Yeah, where it's going to be an extended event, because in some cases you may have a hotshot event where we can't get there fast enough, but then there's other ones where they may be a week or two, and that's where we work together to solve that. But the answer is yes, we will absolutely support that. Yeah, good question. Any other questions? Feel free to interrupt me. I kind of mentioned this, but the application ecosystem is extremely important as well. So not only are we working with the OEMs to bring out devices and equipment that matter to first responders and to the fire service, but we're also working with the application vendors to solve hard problems as well. Chris mentioned in his keynote, we're working on multi-dimensional axes solutions. That's just the tip of the iceberg for where we're going for applications out there. So how do you get FirstNet? Most of you guys and gals are already aware of FirstNet. We will come to you, bottom line. Certainly we've unlocked our distribution channels to be able to cater to you. That way you don't have to go to one location and travel outside of your way. We're more than happy to come to you, cater to you, answer your questions, perform services on site. I'm on a team of nationwide folks, so I have peers across the country that we will be happy to set that up. But also you can work with our AT&T retail outlets. And the reason for that is simplicity. In some cases, that may be the closest place of need that you can get to. They are your public safety partner. So you drop a device, you need a device urgently. Those are some of the reasons that we've worked with our retail outlets to be able to fulfill. And then if you're looking just for some additional information, happy to provide that, but we also have FirstNet.com. FirstNet.com is kind of our landing page. It's got information about the program, information about what we're doing, keeps an updated list of devices, things of that nature. And with that, I will turn it over to you, sir. Any other questions? All right.
Good afternoon, Billy Freeman with the FirstNet Authority. So I get to talk about money. I get to talk about how we need your help spending $18 billion over the next 22 some odd years. The law requires it to be put back into the network. I'll define that as we go along. We're going to talk about the roadmap, how we produced it, and what does it say. So just at a 50,000 foot view, it talks about the technology piece. What are the capabilities of the network? What are the components of the network? How does it work? Public safety feedback, you're going to hear us talking about it. I'll talk about it in this roadmap. Public safety feedback was instrumental in creating this document. We'll talk about it as we go along. We analyzed information to get the best view of what public safety needs. And then we prioritized, and we will prioritize as we go along, that reinvestment. So how did we get there? How do we create it? We reviewed all kinds of documents, all sorts of data. Mike talked about CAD data. We reviewed after-action reports. We looked at industry trends. We looked at what other people were doing, what was going right, what was going wrong, those type things. And they analyze that data, and then we convene subject matter experts to dissect it. Those subject matter experts, public safety people, fire, police, EMS, EMA, 911, and they make it understand the boots on the ground people. So with that information, we identified 6 high-level domains. I'll talk about them in detail shortly. This document is alive. So it's designed, the current document's out, came out 2 weeks ago, is designed to live 2 to 5 years before there's a major upgrade to it. We solicit public safety's input. We've done that. Currently, we are at 2019 just on roadmap engagements. We've done 200 roadmap engagements, reaching 10,000 stakeholders in venues like this, large and small. A lot of one-on-one, just getting that input. Having spent almost 3 decades in public safety, it wasn't, in the fire service, as a boot on the ground person, we didn't get asked what our opinion was very much. But because the public safety advocacy group, and this was built around public safety, the public safety practitioners were brought on board to work in my positions, and several others, because we know how to talk, and we know what's needed, and we know how to talk to you and get the information to see what those trends are, what future pieces need to be made. So that's a constantly going on, that feedback. So then we did the draft, and now we have the final current version of the roadmap. It's downloadable on FirstNet.gov, and that, once again, that document gives us a strategic vision, on how to progress and how to make the network work best for public safety. Identify opportunities. I'm going to talk about it in a little detail coming up, but essentially, once again, how to spend that money that's coming back to us. The FirstNet Authority is self-funded, but it doesn't take $18 billion to fund that authority. We are required by the law to put that back into the network. And I'll talk about that as we go along. And then we just continue developing. It's just a circle. Little by little, every few years, we update just as we stay ahead or on track with current technologies and current needs. We all have seen this change of evolution in the fire service. Back from the day when we had a radio, we had one fireground channel and 2 dispatch channels, one EMS channel and one dispatch EMS channel. To now we have trunk systems and more and smarter radios and those kind of things. So that's that whole evolution. So this is the roadmap domains. So I'm gonna get into some detail on these. So the first one is the core. Mike talked about the core. The significance of the FirstNet network it was required by the law and the contract that there's a separate core built. What that is that's the brains of the network. Trunk radio systems have cores, those kind of things. All cellular systems have cores. This became the 5th cell system in the country, FirstNet did, because we required that core to do several things. Be secure and be separate. It's not virtual, it's a physical core. So that separates us from a lot of other providers that talk about public safety systems. So money is part of that money will likely go into this core, because if you don't maintain the core like we are going to do, then you fall behind in technology. You have to stay current in technology. What is the big buzzword phrase in cellular world right now? 5G. Even though we have the Band 14, we're talking about that, and that's a terrific. We have to maintain currency with technology on that core. So that money will absolutely go into that. Coverage and capacity. Brian talked about deployables. There are a lot of other things. And by the way, the deployables, to your point, to your question, They brought one in 48 hours and set it right down in the middle of Mexico Beach where there was nothing operating, and was able to, and first responders down there were able to connect to that and get phone, data, text right in the middle. And so great program. Some of that reinvestment can go back into more additional deployables, or not necessarily truck-based deployables, but backpack-type deployables. Something can be taken into up in the mountains where there's unlikely coverage, but we all work. Some of us do. It's flat where I come from, but there are mountains that firefighters are in all the time. So those kind of things, deployables. In-building solutions is another big piece. Fire and EMS is a little different than law and some of the other ones, because we're in buildings and in difficult situations. So being able to have that in-building coverage is very important to us. Range, extension, device to device. So we're moving into that evolution, that world where the Internet of Things, or the Internet of Public Safety things. I'll talk a little bit about it as we go over to some of the situational awareness piece, but being able to have a connection, even when the remote connection has gone down, being able to have that connection from that device back out to the incident commander, for instance. Air to ground, they're working on that. Those of you who work with life flight helicopters understand the need for that, to be able to transmit that data in flight. Maritime operations. So we have any coastal folks in here? So you never go out on the water, right? All the time. We have a lot of coasts in this country, and you kind of think about it more than just the West Coast and the East Coast and the Gulf of Mexico. We also cover this. So this network is for 56 states, territories, and the District of Columbia. So you have Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, you have the Hawaiian Islands, you have Guam, you have the Northern Mariana Islands, and you have Alaska. So that's a lot of maritime property that we as first responders have to look at. So that's another piece to look at that we're talking about. Once again, all of this information came from us, FirstNet Authority and the public safety people. They said, this is what's important, this is what is important, and it was narrowed down to make sense. Situational awareness. Little by little, we have evolved into, I go back, I use the simple explanation of when I first came on the fire department, there were 2 radios for a 4-person company. Now that's unheard of. Everybody's got a radio. So that's a situational awareness piece. But as we evolve, we see new SCBAs coming with sensors on it, different items built into them. So you can see things like biometrics wired into pulse, respirations, body temperature for the firefighter in the building, IDLH, what does that look like? Is it clear for us to remove our SCBAs and do overhaul? What does the fire look like? It may be some sort of video, heads-up display, allowing the incident commander. And I'm going to talk about that because I get this question a lot of time. That's a lot of data that's coming to maybe 1 or 2 people outside, and I'll touch on that in a minute. But those kind of things, mapping, location. So currently, GPS has an XY axis, meaning it'll tell you I'm at this point on the earth. What they're diligently working on is the Z-axis, which will tell you, okay, I'm at this point on the earth, 40 feet in the air, fourth floor. It's very important for us. Very important for EMS calls, understanding where somebody is. Somebody or us, we fall through a floor, been there, done that. I was on the 3rd floor, now I'm on the 2nd floor, type thing. And so that's being worked on. One of the groups that works with the FirstNet Authority is the I have to think about it for a second, PSCR, Public Safety Communications Research. And they are part of the NIST the federal government, the NIST, National Institute of Standards and Testing. And if you've ever done putting classes together to teach on your department, you've likely gone to NIST and looked at something that they've tested, get some statistics and some data. And so they're working, they've got a $300 million budget that they are working diligently on to create that Z-axis for us to be safer. There are great folks out in Boulder, Colorado. Obviously cameras and those other pieces. So voice communications, Brian talked about mission critical push to talk. Make no mistake, FirstNet is not here today or in any near future to replace the LMR system, the radio systems. But it can augment. We just had a demo test at the Bristol race, Bristol, Tennessee, using push-to-talk for their additional EMS people they brought on. They had their radios too, but they did the testing as well. They could use the device to do patient care reporting, but also to do talking. I don't see it for a while, but it could, once again I say augment, so we all have fire chiefs and operation chiefs and those kinds of things, and they don't usually like to carry their radios, but if they had that radio built into a device that's plugged, that's integrated into the radio system, that's a force multiplier. We've expanded that and allow for them to have that communications with them all the time, because everybody in this room and out there on the online piece likely has one of these small handheld computers that makes phone calls, because that's what it is. And so that's an envision that internet working. So the next two we're going to talk about, they're very interesting domains, very important to us, but not real important to the commercial world. There's not a lot of profitability there for people to develop some of these things we're talking about, because the reality is we are a small market, a very niche market. And so some of this money can be used to do some of the things that are listed here. For instance, the secure information exchange. So in a simple terms, that means when I send a piece of data to somebody, that it arrives intact exactly how I sent it to the person I sent it to. And that's very important when we're talking about Internet of Things, a heartbeat of a firefighter that's in a fire, or those kind of things. But it's also important to patient care reporting, 12 leads, all those devices that are evolving in that EMS world, and the fire truck that do EMS calls, sending that data, good data, down the pipe. Part of that core piece that I talked about for FirstNet requirement is that has to be a secure core. So that's an encrypted path along the FirstNet when you're using the FirstNet phone that the other commercial networks are not required to do, but they can do it, for an additional cost. It comes with the FirstNet service. So that data access, being able to access data. So how many times I know I've been frustrated, flip that MDT on, and I'm making a mutual aid call with the county or somebody, one of the small municipalities, and I have no data other than mutual aid call, because it's their call that we're going on, and vice versa. It can happen, either way. And all I have is what I'm getting over the talk group or what was relayed. And we know we've become very. Our dispatchers are really good about updating the CAD information as we're moving along, and instead of having to tie the radio up. So data sharing and data access, and it might not be between two fire departments. It could be between fire and police. Some departments do it. Most do not have any access to what the police are doing, or private ambulance service, or whatever they're dealing with. So we see a lot of that. That's a very important piece for us to make that happen. Cybersecurity, we hear about it all the time. We've got information, the law has CGIS, their CGIS database. We have patient care reports that we're sending detailed information about those patients across. And so that cybersecurity piece on the network as well as internally has to be tight, and that's part of that piece. Understanding, working with, reinvesting money in how we can do cybersecurity better, because it's always better. You have to stay ahead of the game. And the other one that doesn't get a lot of movement in the commercial market world is user experience. We have unique needs. Firefighters have equipment. Their equipment has unique requirements. It has to be able to stand up to heat. It has to be able to, well, we don't ever tear up anything, but yeah, it has to be able to not be torn up and easily. So we want to make sure that is. What you see is you see a lot of people out there developing things, applications. That's another piece. We have an application store for the user experience. I'm sorry, not store, catalog. We have an application catalog. Those applications have been vetted through the FirstNet. They've been tested to make sure there's no malware or spyware, that they work, that they're secure, and those are on that catalog. But there are a lot of people out there developing, small companies, large companies, developing applications, hardware, just the whole field, but they get to a point where the company says, okay, this doesn't look like it's a large enough field for us to do, and it could be something unrelated to fire or public safety in general, but it's something that could be crossed over, be it hardware, software, but they've stopped it because it wasn't profitable. We can spend money on those kind of things to help push that over to bring something to us. So we see a lot of the military, that kind of thing. So the priority service, the applications, devices, we have to have stuff that works when we need it and works correctly. Devices, accessories, and that's part of this money piece. Wrong button. So just a quick wrap up. Public safety, we are. Mike and I go out, and so does Brian. They go because we get data from AT&T as well about what their customers are thinking, what kind of questions they're getting, and all that data goes in and it gets analyzed. Part of that analysis is, I go back to what I said about all that data coming back to an incident commander. Part of what we can move money into is artificial intelligence. So there's a trigger there. They don't have to watch and see a red flag that, John Smith, heart rate just went to 200. Or his body temperature is this or that. Artificial intelligence can do that. It triggers it and shows it. So that's money that can be pushed in. So always we're looking at, look, I got a son out there that is a firefighter paramedic. And so, I have a vested interest in making sure that he's safer and does his job more efficiently than I had to do 30 years ago. We did it, we got it done, but looking back, I sometimes wonder how we got it done, because things hadn't changed much, or maybe they've gotten worse as far as what we're doing out there. So we always are looking at public safety needs, and not just at the top level, actual people out there doing it. That roadmap is living. We're constantly updating, making sure we're on the right path. We're in the fire service. We work on strategies and tactics. That's the strategy. That's the strategic vision for the FirstNet Authority. And then the investment, being able to put that money back into making the biggest bang for the buck, making sure that things that make sense, things that are going to help for the fire service and the rest of public safety do their job better. Life and safety, that's what we're all about. You can go to firstnet.gov, and there's a link on there. You can download the roadmap. It's 20-something pages. It explains a lot of information. And that is thank you.
Well, thank you. That's the end of our PowerPoint presentations, but I do want to take a few minutes to transition a little bit away from FirstNet, but talk about a related issue in the public safety communications realm, and that is the issue of the T-band. How many folks in this room are familiar with what T-band public safety spectrum is? I know you are. One individual. A little bit over here. Essentially, this is an issue that's going to impact public safety communications in 11 of the largest major metropolitan areas in the United States today. The same law which created the FirstNet Authority and which is allowing these beneficial tools to exist for all of you to take advantage of also did a couple of other things. One of which was it mandated that public safety licenses that operate on this what's so-called T-band section of spectrum, and that's a dedicated section of spectrum that these 11 metropolitan areas operate on, that they must evacuate, they must clear that segment of spectrum and go and operate someplace else. Now, who does this impact? 11 major metropolitan areas. We're talking the biggest metropolitan areas in this country. We're talking Chicago, Boston, Houston, Miami, New York, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Dallas-Fort Worth, LA, San Francisco, Washington, D.C. Now, who's from any of those places in this room? All right, so some of you didn't even know about this, are going to be impacted. When is this going to happen? This is a little bit of a moving target. The law in question, which again was passed in 2012, mandated that the FCC begin the process of auctioning off this spectrum in 2021, and that 2 years after the end of that auction, that the public safety licensees would have to move. So, as soon as 2023, public safety licensees in Boston, New York, Philly, etc., all of the cities could need to relocate major portions of their communication systems. Obviously, this is problematic for a variety of reasons, not the least of which are that it seems that there is in a number of these municipalities not any place else for these communication systems to go. There just simply isn't sufficient spectrum or quality spectrum for those communications systems to operate on in those geographic areas. And so we have a conundrum here. We have a congressional mandate that public safety, and only public safety, by the way, move their communication systems off the spectrum, but in many places, they don't have any place to go. There is, as a portion of this law, also money that supposedly will help relocation. So in those cities where relocation can actually happen, some money will, that the federal government gets from auctioning off this spectrum will go to public safety to help relocate them, but it doesn't necessarily cover the costs of training. It doesn't necessarily, on your new system, it doesn't necessarily cover the costs of integration. Some of the technical difficulties that we talked about certainly will continue to need to be overcome. And so this is an issue that is coming fairly quickly. Now, what is the solution? Unfortunately, it is going to require an act of Congress to solve this problem. And we all know how Congress acts these days. There is legislation that's out there. There's a bill called Don't Break Up the T-Band Act. It's H.R. 451 that's been introduced in the U.S. House of Representatives that would repeal the requirement for the FCC to auction off the public safety T-band spectrum. And it has been introduced by representatives from New York, Elliot Engel, Peter King, and Lee Zeldin, and a representative from the Houston area, Al Green. Again, these are municipalities that are directly impacted by this problem. But the bill hasn't, frankly, picked up a lot of traction. It has 9 co-sponsors. It's pending before the House Energy and Commerce Committee, which is the same committee that required public safety to vacate the spectrum in the first place. And unfortunately, that committee is not making much progress on moving this issue forward. So this is something that the International Association of Firefighters, as well as other associated public safety organizations at the national level, such as the IAFC, and some of the police organizations have been working on. We continue to have discussions with the with lawmakers on this issue, but as with many things that Congress deals with, until it is an immediate emergency, you don't necessarily see a lot of movement. And so this is, again, another communications, public safety issue that we at your IAFF are dealing with, trying to ensure that our large municipal brothers and sisters will continue to have quality, effective voice communications in their communities, and is going to impact, unfortunately, their jobs and their safety and the safety of their communities. So we continue to work on that. And so with that, we have about 15 minutes to talk about these issues and any related issues that you like. And I'd like to open it up for questions. If anyone has any questions, I have a mic I can bring around.
I'll speak with Shannon. I don't know if you want me to use the mic?
Yeah, if you don't mind, we do have a webcast of this, so if you wouldn't mind speaking to the mic. And can you introduce yourself and your local?
Yes, my name is Greg Markley. I'm with in Washington State, just south of Seattle, Puget Sound Regional Fire Authority. But I sit as the Secretary Treasurer of our state association. So, where have you gotten the most? So you mentioned 9,000 public safety agencies are on it, 750,000 connections. What states have you seen the greatest traction as far as public safety agencies adopting or moving to FirstNet? From what I've seen of it, it seems like a no-brainer, right? Why wouldn't we move? And it's a lesser cost issue. You know, I think in my department with 14 stations, we have, when you talk about the Internet of Things, I think we've got about 200 different connections, right? We're with our MDTs and everything that we have in our engines and other apparatus. Where then would we move? And I stopped down at your booth here this afternoon. What states are you getting the most traction in? And how can we as state associations help? I know we have to work with our fire chiefs certainly, but that's my question.
Gentlemen? Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I'll be happy to answer that. So there's still a consultation aspect to it. So in terms of who's leading the way, I'd say really across the country, your peers are saying, okay, sounds good, like you said, no brainer, come tell me more. You need to be at least a level of confidence to be able to switch from what you're using today to take advantage of FirstNet. That's kind of the first case. We actually don't subdivide who and where is using it publicly. But, you know, what I would say is it runs the entire range from the major agencies to the small agencies to the big states to the small states. We are building out uniformly across the country. But then when it comes down to your intersection and making sure that it caters to your need, that's where we still have just maybe an additional dialogue to say, okay, sounds great. Want to make sure that you're meeting my need. And then me or one of my peers or even the authority would make sure we answer that question for you.
One of the things we do as the authority is, you know, we talk about the outreach and education, the consultation pieces. We'll come out and we'll meet with an agency, you know, one-on-one as a government-to-government, you know, relationship talk with you about what you're doing today, identifying what your broadband use is today, making you start thinking about how you're really using data, moving data around the fire scenes, inventorying like every piece of equipment that you have on each piece of apparatus, on what that information is being exchanged, which have broadband connections. Like if you go out and you look at a modern fire truck today, you look at a mobile data computer, probably has a rig phone, probably has 2 EPCR tablets, and you start looking at those things and looking at the way that you're manipulating that data, and maybe you have 5 connections on the fire truck, and maybe you're buying unlimited data for all that. We sit down with you and we really look at data priorities and help you look at different options for implementing FirstNet so that you can do it in an economical fashion that best meets your operational needs. And we're not going to tell you how to do it. We're going to let you look at options to see how it best works for you. The other thing that we see across the country is like Brian said, you remember we're only a year and a half into this build. So when you start looking at, when we meet with agencies, is we often consult with AT&T, have them come with us, have them show you what those coverage maps are to see if it matches your operational footprint. And if it doesn't match your operational footprint, you as an agency have to decide, does this really meet my operational need, or should I wait a while before, until AT&T builds out the coverage to the point where I can actually use it, effectively. And I want to add, you asked a question earlier, and I want to add on to what you asked about deployables, being on scene for a long time. A lot of the data that we look at on deployables is we look at, the breakdown between fire, law, EMS, and the way those deployables are used. And what we found last year was that when those deployables are, actually out there, law enforcement actually uses those deployables typically 1 to 2 days, for pre-planned events because they needed additional coverage, or they need additional, capacity for some reason. Fire service, on the other hand, when those deployables go out, their typical duration of deployment is probably about 10 to 14 days, because when you start looking at wildland incidents, they're there for a while and for the duration of that event. So I just want to, add on to that answer.
Further questions? Come. And can you introduce yourself and your local?
I'm Brandon Blau. I'm from Springfield, Illinois. I am the Chief of Technical Services there. We're just coming on board. For my personal phone, I have FirstNet. I also had a question about the deployables, as far as, is there any integration within the deployables for our 800 megahertz radios? Because I'm thinking in my neck of the woods that when we would need something like that is oftentimes tornado, that type of thing, where it's knocked everything out. And you talked about being able to push to talk, tie things together so that we can communicate through phones with our radios. I didn't know if there was already something that you've hooked up within that deployable to also help us with our 800 megahertz issues.
We can all touch that, but
Brian's going to brag on himself a little bit here.
I would never.
he's a push-to-talk guy.
Well, yeah. But no, to answer your question, as a component of the deployable, it is a separate exchange right now. So because to be compliant with the RFP and our contract with FirstNet, that deployable has to come to you extremely quickly. But we get that question routinely of, can you bring some additional capability with you, maybe some cache of phones, maybe you don't need it. The LMR integration is something that we see pretty regularly. So what we were able to do is bring that capability with us, but it's not usually inside the cab. But my peers around the country maintain that kind of capability. And so when we get connected, we would bring it to you and say, okay, now let us solve that problem as well.
And again, one of the things we do when we do that consultation with you as an agency to government, when we sit down, we capture all your broadband uses. One of the things we do look at as one of those categories is LMR LTE integration, and then we describe different ways that you could do that. If you have a P25 system, you have a conventional system or repeater system, we start looking at different ways that you could implement the LMR to LTE integration to meet an operational need like what you're talking. So for instance, if you're operating on a conventional system, maybe all you do is you bring out a device that has an LTE component on it, that has your conventional radio on it as a donor radio. That allows you to make that connection actually tie back to your radio system from a distance. But we can talk about all those things.
There are deployable kits that you could purchase and that will do that with the donor radio, and I've seen some of the task forces do it, some of the USAR task forces do it as well. There's probably not a RFP out there for an LMR system that doesn't have some LTE integration component in that RFP right now.
And that scenario that I described in Arizona, where the Department of Public Safety officers out there, basically all you would be doing is if you had that same capability within the vehicle there, you would be just connect to that deployable in absence of the infrastructure that was there.
Good question.
Further questions?
Hey Shannon, I wanted to go back to on the $18 billion that we talked about, and I'm not sure if I hit this, but when I talked about that dedicated spectrum, is AT&T doesn't get access to that spectrum for free, is over the next 20 plus years, they will be paying the FirstNet Authority approximately $18 billion. And those $18 billion, like Billy was saying, is the FirstNet Authority can't have some slush fund to have big parties every year, is we have to actually reinvest that back into the network to make that network better for public safety, advancing those capabilities that we're talking about and investing money into technologies that don't exist today.
That's a really good point. Thank you. If are there further questions? I have a question. Brian, you and Billy both talked a little bit about capabilities as it relates to mission critical voice, or more to the point, the limitations of the system as it relates to mission critical voice. And for a number of years now, we've been hearing mission critical voice is on the horizon, we're working towards it. But can you talk a little bit about what research and what development is going into trying to achieve mission critical voice for firefighters and EMS personnel specifically, what that looks like and what your expectations for the future are?
Absolutely. But prior to AT&T being selected as the construction partner, the prevailing wind of FirstNet was it was going to be a data-only network. And so now we're here and we are able to offer voice service, the telephony, the commercial grade, enhanced push-to-talk service. And I think based on your slides as well as mine, we are planning a very strong path forward where we are approaching mission-critical push-to-talk. There's no announcement that we're making today or even in the near future, but we've said that is something that is meaningful. And we are heavily investing, and it is a roadmap item that the authority has identified that they would like AT&T to continue work on. So I think the bar is very, very high for us to do that correctly, and that's why there's not something in the market today. We want to do it right. We want to make sure that we deliver it to the exacting standard that not only the industry has, but also the authority. But it's exciting, because I think that question means that there is interest and there is an appeal, and where we're going, I think in the near future we will be able to say that we're further along, but we're not there today.
Yeah, so think back, I always go back to my original radio system with a couple of repeaters or a couple of voting sites, and how we evolved into the trunk systems. Good, bad, or indifferent, we have evolved into it and has made things better. We went from Memphis went from one fireground channel to 30 fireground channels. And so that evolution took some time. It took time for cultural acceptance. I say that first because we all know what that is. But it also took time for just the acceptance of the capabilities of, do we trust it? Nothing's 100%, but is there anybody in here that's not using a trunk system, or at least some sort of system that has multiple sites voted or something? It took time for evolution to do that. So this is going to be, because first and foremost, the authority wants to make sure that it's right for us. We have that luxury of making sure that it works right.
I think the other thing too is, I mean, when you look at the history of LMR and how long LMR has been around, I mean, I was talking to guys in Boston, I said, when did you start building your radio system? I think they said like 1910 or something. So you look at how long that system's evolved to provide that on-the-ground capability to support operations. So it's going to take a while for this, LTE to even do that. But when you look at the components of an LMR system, you look at, the devices themselves being ruggedized so that they match, the work environment of a firefighter. You look at device-to-device communications. Brian talked a little bit about that. The capability, so when you go down somewhere below grade and you don't have coverage from the network, that you're able to talk device to device. And then the next thing is, I think of it like a fire triangle. So you got devices, you have device-to-device communication, and then the last thing is building codes. Our building codes haven't caught up to where we're including LTE, or the nationwide public safety broadband network, within those building codes. So one of the things that a couple of things that the FirstNet Authority is working on is, number one, is we are participating in the NFPA process. So we're participants in NFPA 1802, which is, originally it was going to be a radio standard, but now it says communication device standard. And the reason for that is we had the forethought that these LTE was coming into, the technology was starting to mature enough to where that might be a possibility. So we want to make sure it was covered under that umbrella. The next thing is we're working with NFPA 1221 on the in-building systems that will provide that LTE coverage. And then the other place that we work is the International Building Code, International Fire Code, to start implementing or including some LTE language so that those building codes will now include LTE, or that nationwide public safety broadband network component in there, so that when we do in the future, we will be able to use LTE in buildings reliably.
Great. I think we have time for one more question. Billy, you talked a lot about the roadmap, and I think this is the second roadmap. The first was in 2014, if I'm correct? Or?
There was a document.
A document, okay. And this is an improvement.
This is
Absolutely.
This is what we're going with, right? This is our strategic vision.
Can you talk a little bit more specifically about how public safety groups such as the IAFF were involved in building out that roadmap, and how you intend to work with public safety to achieve its goals?
Oh, sure. So the IFF, the IFC, a lot of those engagements that I talked about that we did, and those people that we were in front of, were at the association meetings. We were invited to come in and speak. They understand it. This document makes sense to decision makers. For lack of a better word, it's the business plan. But it's way more than that, because it involves not just what the authority's doing, it involves, more importantly, what's happening in public safety. So all the associations have been involved in it. We have board members on the PSAC, the Public Safety Advisory Committee. Mike and I both served on that when we were on the job, and they are instrumental in making sure we're doing what's best for public safety, because they are the practitioners. And so everybody's been involved, and I say again, just like you're involved right now, 2 days from now, a week from now, many of you are going to be back on a fire truck. And so that's a very unique environment to be able to talk to people that, well, I don't know about you hose guys, but I'm a truck guy, so, have a hose or a ladder or something, that they're going to be doing something with. So having said that, we continue and we will continue. It's our pleasure to do it, to engage as we go along, step by step by step. We have we don't do anything that we don't talk about the roadmap as well. So that answer the question good?
Yeah.
Enough?
Absolutely.
It's also important to point out too, as part of that law, is that law required us to do that Public Safety Advisory Committee, and
Yes.
also required us to have a board. And both of those bodies, those governing bodies within the FirstNet Authority, have public safety input. And that's a true differentiator from any other network that's out there today that's operating, is we're required by law to take public safety input, make sure that this network truly meets the needs of public safety moving into the future.
Appreciate it. Are there further questions for the panel? If not, let's give them a great round of applause.